Welcome to the first episode of the Classic Football Review here on Wearing Number 10. We're live on Twitch, twitch.tv/wearing number 10. If you're watching this on YouTube, welcome as well. This has been pre recorded or it's live recorded on Twitch and then uploaded later on YouTube. I'm looking to get it on Spotify as well. If you're listening to this on Spotify, then I succeeded. If not, well, then I failed. But I'm going to be doing my best to get it on Spotify in podcast form. So this is going to be the first episode of what's hopefully going to be a recurring series here on Wearing Number 10. It's the classic football review. We go back, review classic football matches. It's clues in the name. And we're starting this series with a show that's well deserving of the title of being a classic football match. We're talking about the 2005 Champions League final, Liverpool AC Milan, also known as the Miracle of Istanbul. 25th of May 2005 from the Ataturk Olympic Stadium in Istanbul, Turkey. And almost forgot to introduce my co-host for today. He's from League of Ireland TV. It's Colm McDonnell. How you doing, Colm?
I'm great, Sean. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Now, I would like to be able to recall things that happened in these matches from the time as this series progresses. But unfortunately, I was 6 years old when this match took place, and I remember blurry sounds and colors and having to go to bed at halftime. I didn't even know what the score was at halftime. Of course, most people listening and or watching will know. Do you have any memories from the time?
Yeah, I think it was kind of before my time as a Liverpool fan. I think the first season that I probably really remember is the 2008 2009 season. But I get my Liverpool fan ness from my dad, and he was obviously watching the match at home. I do remember yelling and shouting around bedtime when I was probably having a story read to me by my mom. It was only years and years later that I actually realized what had happened and the significance of it.
It was significant. It was significant at the time as well, not just because it was a Champions League final, but it was between two of the more decorated teams. Liverpool were four-time winners, first time in the final since '85, and it did feel like a bit of a comeback story because the last time they were in a Champions League final was the Heysel Stadium disaster, which got all English teams kicked out of European competition for considerable amount of time. And AC Milan, on the other hand, were six-time winners. They had only just won the tournament a couple of years ago, defeated Juventus in, I think it was a very boring final, actually. They won it on penalties in the end. Liverpool were not the favourites, I think it's fair to say, coming into this because Milan had just looking at their team sheet, it's just legend in every single position. There's one point later on in the game where I'm just going to get this right. The commentators say they're just passing the ball around the place. It goes Seedorf, Pirlo, Cafu, Gattuso, Pirlo, Kaka, and that's not even mentioning Maldini and Yap Stam. It's just a team of stars really. Whereas Liverpool didn't have that. I mean, they had players that would go on to become legends: Gerrard, Alonso, Jamie Carragher. But they also had Jimmy Traore and Harry Kewell, who I actually found a Guardian article at the time that called, well, the Guardian was live blogging the game. They called Kewell an underachieving charlatan, which seems unfair. But there's
So,
obviously there's a gulf of class there.
well, oh yeah, like without a shadow of a doubt, and Liverpool really had no right to be in the Champions League in the final in the first place. I mean, their road was as rocky as they come. But yeah, like if you're talking about the match day squad, it was apples and oranges, like you said. If there was a football Hall of Fame, pretty much everyone in that Milan squad. I mean, you were listing out players there, like you're not even mentioning the likes of Jon Dahl Tomasson, who was probably one of the finest players to ever come out of his country. Like Serginho is often forgotten about. Brazilian legends. Yeah, they had quality right across the park. Dida was an absolute giant. I think he was what 6'6", 6'7", and he looked even bigger in the goal. But like it's all relative. You mentioned the names there, like Jimmy Traore and Harry Kewell, but every player kind of played their part. I mean, you had a 30-something-year-old Vladimir Smicer score the second goal. Jimmy Traore made his own very crucial block at one stage in the game. So it's all relative. I mean, it's the age old cliche, but like once you get on the pitch, once you cross the white line, it's 11 men against 11 men, and anything can happen. And it did, obviously.
Well, we did see some real heroism from Liverpool, but we have to get through an entire first half first to find it. Milan were actually not coming into this with too much momentum. They were after throwing away the Serie A title to Juventus. They were winless in their last four games, lost to Juventus in what was a massive clash for the title, and then drew their last three games of essentially throwing away the title. As the game got started, I actually saw the symbol on the Liverpool shirt. They had their little eagle or phoenix fella, whatever it is they have on their crest,
The
which is
liver bird.
it's a nice look. It's
Mm.
not just text saying Champions League Final 2005. It's a real personal touch. And speaking of the jerseys, Clive Tilsley and Andy Townsend were on commentary for this game, and Clive Tilsley was a fountain of facts the entire night. He said every time Liverpool have won the Champions League, they've done it in red and they've beaten a team in white. That trend continued on this night, and it would continue in 2019 when they beat Spurs. As the game kicked off, Andy Townsend on commentary said you need to switch on immediately, uh, focus from the first minute. By the time that first minute was over, they were 1-0 down.
Yeah, Paolo Maldini of all people popping up with a half volley. Again, at the time I didn't really realize the significance. I didn't realize the legend that he was, but obviously looking back, he was kind of almost coming into the twilight of his career and set Milan on their way to what looked like was going to be a routine victory after the first half. It was a fantastic finish. I mean, I don't think you could really blame Jerzy Dudek for any of the goals, but particularly not this one. It was just a fantastically well taken strike from a man who was far more known for his defending prowess than his attacking ability.
297 minutes, I think it was, that Liverpool had gone without conceding in the Champions League, which, considering,
Mm.
as we mentioned, how difficult their road was to get to the final, that was really impressive. But that went out the window. And it was actually something predicted by Carlo Ancelotti, who said they'd go up within 3 minutes. And Carlo Ancelotti was actually pretty bullish in his pre-match predictions, because it wasn't certain whether Liverpool were going to get into the Champions League, even if they did win, because they were after finishing fifth in the league behind Everton. And Ancelotti said before the game, I think we may just do the English Federation a favor and solve this, which is confident talk. But after that, obviously massive shock to the system, the game did kind of settle down into a more reasoned, regular game, as regular as a Champions League final can be. Uh, Manchester United, obviously Liverpool's big rivals, were the first team to come back from a deficit to win the Champions League, said Clive Tilsley on commentary. I'll be referencing him a lot. Another thing he mentioned was the age of the Milan defenders, because it was a 10-year team at the time. We've talked about how many legends are in that team, and their legacy of age like a fine wine. But even back then, they were absolute legends. But they were talking about, if there's one place that the Liverpool attackers could strike, it was at the defense. Obviously, they were looking to do that anyway, but they weren't exactly spring chickens, those Milan defenders. Cafu and Maldini, the fullbacks, were 35 and 37 apiece, and yet you had Cafu bombing up and down the right wing for almost the entirety of that first half.
Yeah, Cafu, like, I mean, there's not a lot that can't be said about his career that hasn't been said already. But again, like, the Milan players didn't look their age that night, particularly in that first half. With what they lacked maybe in a step of pace in their previous career, they more than made up for in experience and positioning on the field. And Liverpool were kind of restricted to half chances, pot shots from the edge of the box. And Luis Garcia had a couple that they never really challenged Dida too much. I mean, Dida barely broke a sweat, I'd say, in that first half. And it
And
was due
Liverpool
to
was kind of helping them in that regard, I think. Sorry to cut across there, but because Barros was up on his own, and a lot of the Liverpool, a lot of the ways Liverpool were trying to create chances, they were just feeding the ball up to Barros and expect him to drop in behind, but he was met with two, three stern Milan defenders, and he didn't really have a chance.
Yeah, look, I mean, like Milan had a decent year that year. He was coming off the back of a golden boot in the previous year. He had some great goals throughout the season. Not too many memorable in the Champions League run. I think, players like Luis Garcia kind of stole the show on that run to Istanbul. But he was always going to be a threat that was, as you can tell by the match report, pretty neutralized by Cafu and co.
Well, you mentioned Luis Garcia. He was invaluable to Liverpool in defence because he had to head off the line from Hernan Crespo from a corner. Crespo was an interesting case. A lot of players were near seemed like they were nearing an end. There was speculation about Gerrard's future, which we'll get to. Smeetzer, who would turn out to be critical, was playing his last game for Liverpool, and Crespo was on his way back to Chelsea, and he would help them out a lot. And it was almost like I think Chelsea were looking at them thinking, "Serves you right," because in the semi final, obviously, well, not obviously, they had uh are arguably been screwed because the goal that ultimately took Liverpool to the final, it turned out it didn't cross the line. Mourinho called it a ghost goal, so it seemed like karma from the west side of London was biting Liverpool,
Mm.
especially when the Liverpool attackers weren't really offering anything. Barros and Garcia, I remember at the various times blasted high and wide. But Milan were having issues of their own. They kept catching themselves offside, including a moment where Shevchenko rolled the ball into the net, but was judged to be offside. And looking back on that replay, it was a very tight call. It was one of those that I think hindsight's 2020, but VAR would have been brought in. But ultimately, it was the right decision. But as the first half went on, the difference in class really started to show because Liverpool were having to work really hard, whereas Milan just seemed to be gliding through them.
Yeah, like I mean, it looked effortless for Milan to pass around the ball. Like Kaka and Pirlo in particular, like Pirlo's possibly one of the greatest passers of a football that's ever lived, and Kaka, while the latter half of his career didn't really live up to what we hoped we would see from the on the basis of his first half, he was still, he had still yet to receive his Ballon d'Or at that stage in his career. So he was coming towards what would be the peak of his powers, and as you say, they kind of glided around the pitch and they were moving the ball around and like the two goals that came from Crespo came from fabulous passing moves from Milan. Obviously, a great cutback that was probably fortunate to actually reach Crespo in the end. They went through a number of players before he kind of turned back on himself to get it into the goal. But that third goal is just pure football. I mean, it's everything you want from a goal in football. The pass through to play Crespo in was absolutely world class.
There was a handball though just before Milan went up the other end and scored the second goal, wasn't there? Maldini could have been in real trouble there.
Yeah, but again, look, that's football. Things go against you and things go for you. I mean, if you analyze every single decision on the road to the final and in the final itself, you can pick and choose who deserved to have won based on missed refereeing calls. So it happened, and the game had to go on, and Milan took advantage of that.
They did. The commentators did talk about it for a while, but eventually they did have to stop to just drool over the third goal. And yeah, it was
Yeah,
just gorgeous, gorgeous finish. The turn, not just the pass from Kaka, but the turn when he first
yeah.
took possession to open up the space for himself.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was that he kind of rolled, but just by his turn, but he got away. I think it might have been Big Garcia. And yeah, like the pass was ridiculous. And look, I think at that time as well, like you see passes like that on a regular basis. I think Jordan Henderson does it once a game, kind of the outside of the boot curling around a defender. But at that stage, like that was ridiculous what Kaka did, and it was Milan firing on all cylinders. And they got their just reward. I don't think anybody has any qualms about it. They deserve to be 3 goals ahead. Like you said, might have been unlucky in that offside call with Shevchenko. They could have been more ahead, and if it was more, the game probably would have been out of sight. You're not coming back from four, I think, but three was just the right amount to be able to spark some hope.
Yeah, Kaka was. I don't know if there's a man of the half award, but Kaka would have most certainly clinched it. And if he would, if Milan had managed to hold on, he would have got the man of the match award because it really was a tale of two halves, and those halves were epitomized by the talisman on either side. But coming into that second half, it became the half of Steven Gerrard. But obviously, a lot had to change for that to happen. And that was first seen on the pitch with Rafa Benitez's substitutions. Kuhl had already come off injured, and he'd been replaced by, I think it was Smeetzer.
Yeah, I believe so.
And then at the halftime change, Didi Hamann came on for Steve Finnan. It was going to be Jimmy Traore, but Finnan was carrying a bit of an injury, and the physio said to Benitez at halftime, "Look, it's not he's not going to be 100% coming back out."
Hmm.
Finnan is Benitez has since said that Finnan wanted to kill the physio for that, but your pride has to take a back seat for the team, and it did pay off in more ways than one. But it didn't look like it was going to, because Milan, for the first few minutes of the second half, they kind of picked up where they left off, stroking the ball around fairly comfortably. And for Liverpool, even in the first half, chances were cropping up here and there, but Alonso's drive went just wide from the edge of the box about 5 minutes into the second half, and that kind of, I was going to say flipped something, but Milan did come back with a chance of their own. Shevchenko with an absolute howitzer of a free kick that Dudek did really well to push around the post. But then the comeback started. Risa needed two bites of the cherry to get the cross in. I think the first one was charged down by Cafu, but the second one landed right in the head of Steven Gerrard, and the ball landed right in the back of the net.
Yeah, look, I mean, Cafu did well to block the first one. I think if he really wanted to, he probably could have blocked the second one. I think he kind of lagged back a little bit on Risa, maybe fearing that Risa might try and take him to the byline because, he was quite fast still then at that stage of his career. But he got the ball in. It's a fantastic header from Gerrard. I mean, like I said, Dida is a giant of a man, and most shots that reach a goal, and like it wasn't a powerful header by any means. So it had to be pretty much inch perfect. It had to go into that far corner. It was curling away from Dida. Like the fact that he got it beyond him without that much power is a bit miraculous in itself. I mean, Dida's wingspan is probably as long as he is. And so there was every chance that he could have just gotten fingertips to it. But as it happened, the neck muscles of Steven Gerrard, the flight of the ball, it found its way into that bottom corner, and that was just the spark that was needed. I think Liverpool, obviously, as any team would be, were deflated going in at halftime. But all you need in football is one moment, and it got the crowd back on side. I mean, like people have always talked about it. Like there was definitely a majority of Liverpool fans in the stadium that night, and as soon as Gerrard scored that goal, it was, oh, hang on a minute, this isn't quite over. And what was to come proved that very much.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the fans, because as soon as the game restarted, Liverpool got the ball back, and the roar went up from the Liverpool end, and it was a sizable Liverpool end. Speaking of which, just mention the fans for a moment. That trip, just going to Istanbul, must be unbelievable, because it's a long way, first of all, but that sense of occasion, just, I can't imagine how exciting that must be, just to go on that trip knowing that you're going to be there for such a massive moment in the club's history. And obviously, it became more of a moment than the fans could ever have imagined, arguably their finest hour, which is saying something considering what Liverpool have achieved over the years. But to not just be there, but to be there having been at the lowest of lows, and then to bounce back as they did, and they continued the bounce back almost straight away, because the second goal came almost immediately after the first one. Alonso to Hamann to Smeetzer on the edge of the box. Smeetzer took the drive in a similar place to where Alonso had taken his drive not too long before that. And Dida, he didn't have a chance in the first one. He could have done more with that one, but it just felt like the wave of momentum from Liverpool just carried it in.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot that went into that goal. Obviously, they worked it across very well to Vladimir to get the strike off. He was fairly far out. Lucky that Milan Baros kind of got out of the way of it as well. It was heading for his stomach before he kind of moved himself out of the way, and maybe that kind of unsighted Dida a little bit. But as I said, he's a big man, and to try and get down that quickly when you're that big is going to be a challenge. And I'd say, he probably didn't see the flight of the ball until fairly late, and it was right into that bottom corner. I mean, as bottom corner as you could get, really. So I wouldn't put too much fault on his shoulders. Um, Possibly for the third goal, you could say he could do better, but for that, I think it was just a fantastic strike from Vladimir Smicer, and it was obviously one of his two send offs of the night for the Liverpool fans. He scores in the penalty shootout later on, but like you mentioned before, he was playing his last game, and it was a lovely way to say goodbye for what had been a fantastic career, a successful career for Liverpool up until that point. Treble winner in 2000, 2001, etc. And yeah, it was just a fantastic goal. There's no other way about it.
And it was just a snowball effect. 2-3 minutes later, Gerrard wins a penalty for Liverpool, and they've got suddenly got the chance to equalize. Now, it was a I think it's fair to say a rash challenge from Gattuso, and the commentators were incredulous that he wasn't sent off. And to be honest, I was too, because that's a clear goal scoring opportunity, isn't it?
You would think, I mean, a lot of people said it wasn't even a foul, and it really depends, I suppose, what era of football you come from. I mean, there is contact there by the letter of the law. Stevie makes a lot of it, but I think most players would in that situation. It was kind of a hand on the shoulder thing, really, in the grand scheme of things. Is it enough to take you down? Maybe not, but Stevie went down, the penalty was given. You would imagine that it was a goal scoring opportunity. Yeah, I mean, like Steven Gerrard on his right foot coming onto it from the edge of the box, you could only really imagine one scenario. Now there were Milan players between him and the goal, but they were kind of off to the side. So whether or not they would have even tried to make contact with the ball, um, it's just kind of up for debate. I suppose the important thing was that we did get the penalty. The referee might have been thinking, harsh enough to send them off as well as give the penalty. I know that whole double jeopardy thing has been a discussion in football before. Um, my biggest surprise in that whole sequence is that Gerrard didn't take the penalty himself. Like I wasn't a Liverpool fan at the time. I wasn't watching many Liverpool games throughout the season, so I'm open to correction. Maybe Alonso was the regular penalty taker, but historically Gerrard has scored some since then has scored some massively important penalties. So that was my biggest surprise when I was watching it back.
Well, it was Xavi Alonso taking the penalty, and Dida somewhat redeemed himself for the second goal. He actually managed to save it, but Alonso thrashed in the rebound, and that was that. And 3 goals in the first 15 minutes is unbelievable in any circumstance, but 3 goals in the first 15 minutes of a second half after being dominated the first half, and those 3 goals came within the space of 5 minutes. It's kind of mind-boggling, really. Now, there is a bit of a question that comes from this. This has been called the greatest comeback in Champions League history, club football history, whatever. And it faces stiff competition from United in '99. One big drawback to the argument that this is the greatest comeback ever is, yeah, they got their 3 goals in 15 minutes, but then they had another half an hour to find a winner. So, in terms of ranking it as the greatest comeback, does that impact your decision?
No, I don't think so. I would still have it over, like completely biased, obviously. I would still have it over Manchester United because you got to still understand the disparity in quality between the two sides. I mean, people hailed the Manchester United team of '99 as one of the greatest ever, boasting all of those players that they had. This was by far, like, today's Liverpool squad would have the 2005 Liverpool team for breakfast. And I think that's where the case for this being the greatest comeback ever, because it's not just what they did coming down from 3-0 down. and 3 goals in the space of 6 minutes. I mean, doing that enough was alone to say that they could have gone on and get a winner. I think you're asking too much. I think that gap in quality is what makes this so special. Is that you know Milan came in as heavy favorites, and for 54 minutes, they did exactly what they needed to do. They were 3-0 up, and then all of a sudden, a flash in the pan moment, just a bit of inspiration from Steven Gerrard, and 6 minutes later, and Liverpool are level. To then go on and try and find a winner. I mean, I'd say probably when they got level, it's like, oh God, now we have to contend again with this Milan team. We're back on level terms. Now the only difference is we have an hour of football on us, so we're all tireder. As the match goes on, you see pulled hamstrings and people just like absolutely desperately using every last bit of energy they can to put their bodies on the line. Um, yeah, like in my mind, this is probably the greatest football comeback ever. Like there's, if you ask me, I think that Liverpool against Barcelona contends with United as well, but that's a debate for another day.
Personally, I don't even think that was the greatest comeback of the week, but I digress. The tempo of the game lulled a bit, somewhat inevitably, because it would have been such a frantic first 15 minutes. But Milan, it felt like Milan needed to recover from the shock of losing their lead, and Liverpool kind of needed to take a breath because they just exploded out of the blocks. But Milan did start to find their groove again, and this is where the Liverpool defense came into it, which had been very shaky in the first half, solidified itself. Jimmy Traore had a fantastic clearance off the line. Jamie Carragher with a tackle that was timed absolutely perfectly on Kaka, which, the juxtaposition of glamour there. Kaka, this silky Brazilian midfielder, and Jamie Carragher, who is, if you were to draw up a scouser in a lab, it would probably look like him. And Kaka had a chance to win it near the end. A corner was headed on from Yapstam, and the goal was gaping for him, but unfortunately for him, he just never saw it coming. I mean, I wasn't expecting him heading to be his strong suit, but it was still a big chance to miss, and it was the last chance of the match. And yeah, it imagine turning on. Imagine if you'd not watched the second half, you'd turn the TV back on, and you see when the final whistle blows, you don't see Milan players jumping around the place, you don't see Liverpool players slumping to the ground. They all kind of just stand there, as you do when the game ends in a draw and it's off to extra time. It's a bit anticlimactic, but I'm sure Liverpool fans would have taken it. But extra time didn't throw up much in the way of surprises, except for, I think, the best double save I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy. Dudek says himself that it was the best save that he's ever made in his career. Taking the Liverpool goggles off for a second. I mean, Andriy Shevchenko has to do better. Like he at that time was one of the most potent strikers that Europe had. Um, and whatever about the first one, the second one he thrashes at it and he kicks it straight at Jerzy Dudek. I suppose
It's like
you
his
could.
hand is just there, and the ball just happens to hit it and ricochet over the bar. It's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, like I don't know how much goalkeeping skill was involved more so than luck and being in the right place. You could say that I'm being harsh on Shevchenko in saying that he should score there. It is coming at him very fast, but like if he hit it just almost anywhere else, he would have hit the back of the net. But he decided to hit it straight into Jerzy Dudek, and it went over the bar. And I think that could have had a lasting mental impact on Shevchenko himself. He had already had chances earlier in the game and he just wasn't firing. It was Crespo doing the damage, obviously, in the first half. And maybe he carried that with him into the dreaded penalty shootout.
Well, we almost didn't get there. Liverpool had a last minute free kick, and it was kind of set up like a goal movie. Steven Gerrard standing over at the Scouser boy who'd seen his team humiliated in the first half, and had picked them up by the scruff of the neck and dragged them back into it. And now was here is his chance to win the greatest prize in all of club football by bending home an inch perfect free kick. The first two goal movies end on inch perfect free kicks. And then he passes it to, I think it was Ham, and it it's limply hit into the wall, and away it goes. And penalties it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, there we go. The penalty shootout. It happened at the Milan end of the goal. The goal with Milan fans at that end, I should say. You wouldn't know it from the sound of the Liverpool fans, and not just the sound of the Liverpool fans, but the lack of sound from the Milan fans. I mean, Milan do score a couple of penalties, and you can hear a pin drop.
Yeah, I mean, I know from unfortunate experience in the last 2 weeks how important it can be to have a penalty shootout be taken where your fans are. I work for Bohemians Football Club in Dublin, and we only recently lost the FAI Cup final against St. Pat's, and Pats were fortunate enough to get the penalties taken in their end, and the noise out of them, like credit to the Pats fans, was ridiculous. Every time that they scored, it was a huge roar, and Bows fans did what they could from their end, but it's a massive. It's usually a massive psychological advantage to have the penalties being taken in your end. But like you said, I mean, Liverpool, they probably had a few sleeper agents within that Milan setup as well. I mean, there was the attendance on the night was about 69,000. I reckon 60% of that were probably Liverpool fans. And they made themselves heard despite, as you say, penalties being struck into the Milan end.
Liverpool won their previous European Cup on penalties in 1984, and that's been made famous by the antics of Bruce Grobbelaar, who was their goalkeeper, who basically did jelly legs and psyched out the I can't remember who. Do you remember who they were playing?
It was AC Milan.
It was AC Milan again.
Yeah.
They basically psyched the Milan players in the sky in it, and Dudek.
Hmm.
He said afterwards he had studied Grobbelaar and he utilized his tactics to great effect. Serginho was first up, absolutely skied it.
Yeah.
He
Sorry, they beat Roma. Sorry,
oh Roma.
apologies. Yeah, they did play Milan in that competition, but it wasn't in the final. Sorry.
Uh, Didi Hamann got Liverpool off the mark. German scoring a penalty was fairly typical. Andre Perlo was up next. He also missed, but it wouldn't count today. Dudek was almost on top of him.
Well, see, this is the thing, and it's pointed out to by everybody who's not a Liverpool fan. Dudek was pretty much off his line for all of Milan's penalties, including the crucial one at the end. And in the age of VAR and all that kind of stuff, it wouldn't fly. He was lucky enough to get away with it, and it's probably a fact that's often overlooked, because of the occasion that it was. But Dudek was a lucky boy. Yeah, like I mean, one thing I'd say, like, so we come now as well to the second farewell gift that Smeacer gave as well. He scored his penalty, and Hamann as well. He was off to City the next season, so that was his last involvement as a Liverpool player, was to score a penalty as well, which was great to see.
Tomlinson, you've sung his praises as a great Danish player. He was able to get Milan off the mark. Risa was unlucky. Dida using all of his length to get there. Then Kaka with probably actually the best penalty of the shootout, just fired it
Mm,
into the roof of the net, and Dudek was going full Grobbelaar on him. It would be terrifying to face that. I think, especially in those circumstances, it's like a pressure cooker.
hmm.
Smeater with his goodbye present, and then Shevchenko missed and Liverpool won. Now, I do feel bad for Shevchenko because as he was stepping up to it, he didn't look the most confident. He hadn't had the best game. He missed a couple of big chances. He had a goal ruled out for offside. And so I think he might have just wanted to keep it simple, just try to knock it down the middle. I see what he was trying to do with it, but Dudek had enough of a trailing hand to anticipate it and keep it out. And I Shevchenko's a great player, and I think a lot of people forget that because obviously he missed this crucial penalty, and his time with Chelsea was lackluster. But I just wanted to take a moment to give a shout out to Shevchenko because he's maybe the best player Ukraine ever had.
Oh, I don't think that's in question. I think he's probably the greatest player Ukraine have had and might ever have. But yeah, look, if you're going to go down the middle, you have to have some sort of power on it. You need to kind of thrash it a bit because if you don't, you leave yourself open. Even if a keeper is diving, they might be able to trail a toe, or in this case, I mean, Dudek pretty much got his full hand on the ball, and was able to keep it out. So I think that was his mistake there. It's just if you're going to go down the middle, you have to smash it, um, and he didn't. And I think that was the culmination of just a bad day at the office. Like you said, he had a goal disallowed. He missed some crucial chances. That was probably playing in the back of his mind. He didn't look confident. He rolled back the tapes. If you look at him as he's walking up, he doesn't look comfortable at all. He looks a bit dejected already. I liken it to when Chris Waddle stepped up to take the final penalty that sealed England's fate in the 1990 World Cup. Like he's walking up towards the penalty spot, and he already looks like he's defeated. They'd obviously missed one just before, and he just looks like right. This is it. It's over anyway, which
He
is
actually
obviously not.
gestures, just kind of like, come on, just get on,
Yeah,
let's get this
just
over
get
with.
on with it. And Shevchenko had that same look of dejection already on his face. Like he didn't seem confident whatsoever, and he took the penalty of a man who was lacking that confidence.
Well, there's the thrill and the agony of a final, I guess, and joy unconfined for Liverpool. They were 4 minutes from elimination actually in the group stage against Olympiacos, and then Gerrard scored that goal that the commentary from that's become a meme. They took out Chelsea, who had nearly the perfect season actually, and I think about how close Chelsea came to winning that Champions League, because if that goal hadn't counted in the semi-final, which it probably shouldn't have, they could have got to the final. And who knows, with that Mourinho team, would they've been able to shut down Milan and that Chelsea side, which won the Premier League with a record points total, would have been even more revered than it already was. And Milan wouldn't have had Crespo at their disposal because he was there on loan from Chelsea.
Yeah, look, I mean, if you try and analyze Liverpool's path, I mean, like I said towards the top of the show, they almost shouldn't have been there. They scraped through the third round of qualifying against Grazer, an Austrian team. In the group stage, they relied on that moment of absolute genius from Steven Gerrard after struggling earlier in the group, particularly against Deportivo La Coruña, who are a bit of a fallen giant of Europe now at this stage. And they finished second in their group, which means generally when you finish second in your group, you're going to be facing a pretty strong side. They came up against Bayer Leverkusen and won 6-2 on aggregate. Set up a tie with Juventus, who at that time, like you say, they went on to win Serie A. They had some fantastic players in their squad: Del Piero, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, who am I thinking of? The centre back, Fabio Cannavaro, of course, before he was bald. Um, and then yeah, like you said, it set up that meeting with Chelsea, and the Chelsea one is hilarious because I think that was about to be Chelsea and Liverpool's fourth and fifth meetings respectively that season, and Mourinho had gotten the best of Benitez as he did for the majority of his career in those meetings, but when it counted, I mean, they say it was a ghost goal, but it was almost like Anfield sucked that ball so close to the line that the referee thought it was a goal. Now, again, I'm gonna roll out the argument that every Liverpool fan does when somebody brings up the ghost goal. If that doesn't go in, Petr Cech gets sent off, and Liverpool have a penalty. So it could have actually ended up worse for Chelsea because they would have lost their goalkeeper for the rest of the game and for the second leg, and they could have been 1-0 down anyway. Now it's all if buts and maybes, but this is what talking about sport in hindsight is. Um, and yeah, it was just a pretty remarkable run by Liverpool. If you look at Milan, by contrast, their group they qualified as Serie A champions, so they had no third round of qualifying. I had to remind myself of who was in their group, but they had Barcelona and then Shakhtar and Celtic, who weren't an issue for them. Came up against Man United, disposed of them pretty handily. Crespo scoring in both legs. They knocked out their cross city rivals in Inter Milan. And then PSV, I completely forgot this. PSV in the semi-finals, another kind of giant of Europe gone by. But by contrast, Milan had a much easier route to the final, and Liverpool really had to work hard for it. And yeah, that's what meant it even more. And that's why I think it's probably one of the most meaningful Champions League wins in the history of the competition. Going back to before it was the Champions League when it was the old European Cup, I don't think many actually compare quite closely to it.
You mentioned Chelsea in hindsight. I didn't know at the time, and it took me a long time to find out just how heavy the speculation was that Gerrard would go to Chelsea, and it seems ridiculous that he would because that performance, that performance and win would have been a big factor in him staying, I think, and because he stayed, I think the legacy of it grew over time. And I have something here that I just wanted to read. Uh, Gerrard is the singular reason why two generations of kids are Liverpool fans. The club weren't winning anything for 15 years, and as school kids, most of these people were too young to be attracted by the Liverpool philosophy. It was all about Gerrard, and then he taught us what Liverpool is. If he went to Chelsea or Real Madrid, there wouldn't be a lot of Liverpool supporters in this generation, and Liverpool probably wouldn't be in this moment with this amazing team today. We'd probably be a mid-table club riddled with debt. This was the impact of Steven Gerrard. We need to stop judging individuals by players, by trophies, because this is a team sport. If you look at pure individual impact, Steven Gerrard might be the most consequential player in the last 25 years. And I can actually speak to that somewhat because I'm not a Liverpool fan. And yet, even I, at 6 years old or whatever it was, I saw that captain's armband. He had the big yellow band with the black C, and I remember taking empty toilet paper rolls and coloring in them in yellow and putting on the black C. And I mean, I couldn't put them on my arm either if they were too small or even as a child, my arms are too unbelievably big. But that was the impact he had, and to think that uh that was all for nothing seems insane looking back on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, you hit the nail on the head. If Liverpool don't win that final, I think Gerrard could well have left. And I thank God every day that he did. He's still my favorite player from when I was growing up, and I think he always will be for what he did for the club as a servant. To imagine him joining that Chelsea team kind of makes the boil rise to the top of my throat. I mean, it would have been catastrophic for Liverpool, who, they would go on and win the FA Cup final the next year. Never really achieved the success that Gerrard's career deserved, but I can only imagine where the club would be today if it wasn't for him. We all joke about Everton being Liverpool's little brothers in the city, but if Gerrard leaves, that that Liverpool squad without him looks a lot closer to an Everton squad than it does to what we know now to be a Liverpool standard squad.
I do wonder whether it would have worked at Chelsea because for years Gerrard and Lampard in the same midfield in England didn't work. But do you think Mourinho would have found a way?
Um, it depends. I don't particularly think that Gerrard and Lampard ever had good managers over them in the England setup to actually utilize them both. But then again, they are very similar midfielders, and maybe it wouldn't have worked. It would have definitely ruffled a few feathers going into that team, that well established at that time Chelsea team. Because there's some superb midfielders already established there. So who's to say if it wouldn't have worked? Whether or not Gerrard would have got along with Mourinho and all this kind of stuff. I'm just glad that it didn't happen.
So yeah, the night ended with Gerrard. Gerrard actually ended the night with the trophy at his bed. He actually had to when you go back and watch the trophy presentation. The poor old chap doesn't know where Gerrard is. Gerrard has to give him a
Hmm.
nudge, so he turns around and gives him the trophy. And when he raises it, it was the first time I'd seen confetti, and that in my mind is what confetti should look like because it was absolutely everywhere. I mean, God bless the poor guy who had to clean it up, but it was so much of it
Mm.
just engulfed the camera, and yeah, that's the kind of the gold standard for me for what confetti and pyro and a trophy celebration should look like. But going forward, there was this long-standing sort of urban legend, and I believed it for years, that this Liverpool Champions League win was what kept Everton out of the Champions League, because Everton had finished fourth and qualified by right, and Liverpool had finished outside the top four. So the question was there as to whether or not they would be allowed to come back and defend their title. When Chelsea won it in 2012, Spurs, who'd finished fourth, got kicked out and weren't allowed to play in the Champions League. But Everton, they did get their shot in the final qualifying round before the group stages. They ended up losing to Villarreal, who actually made it all the way to the semi-final. But this win for Liverpool actually started a real period of dominance is a strong word because they didn't win it every time. But for 7 of the next 8 years, there was an English team in the Champions League final, and this was perhaps I look back on it more nostalgically than I should because it was when I grew up watching. But it felt like the Premier League was on a real high point at that stage because there were constantly teams competing at the highest level in Europe, and there was the title races were going down to the wire most years. Was this, do you think, kind of a real golden era for English club football?
It was one golden era. I think, in the last couple of years we've been going through another. Yeah, I mean, like that was kind of back in the days of the what was always considered the top four, which was Liverpool, Chelsea, Manchester United, and Arsenal. And obviously, Arsenal made it all the way to the final the following year. Liverpool were back there in 06, 07, all English final 07, 08. United then make it in 08 or 09 and lose out to Barcelona. So yeah, it was a great time to be a fan of English football, and there were some terrific players in the league. He just about got the latter stages of Henry's career before he moved on. Ronaldo was starting to come into his own with Manchester United, as was Wayne Rooney. So yeah, I mean, some terrific football was played by English clubs, and Liverpool were always kind of perennial quarter finalists at the very least, and always had quite good success in Europe. And we're unlucky not to win it in 2007 again against the same opponents. But yeah, it was a great time for English football. I do think that, like there's never ever one golden era because it all depends on the fans, their memory. We're living in what I would consider to be a bit of a golden era of English football right now. But we're too close to it to actually tell. It'll take another 10 or 15 years on, and we'll be looking back at the Mohamed Salahs of the world in the same way that we look back at well, almost the same way that you'd look back at the Stephen Gerrards. Can't hear you there, Sean, I don't think.
Yeah, I got that right almost every time, but I
Yeah.
at the end I didn't realize I was muted. But that was the 2005 Champions League final. It's as good a match as any to start off a classic football review series. If you want to find out when we're next on, we've got Twitter and Instagram. It's at wearing number 10. That's wearing number 10. We're right here on Twitch, twitch.tv/ wearing number 10. That's where we're going to be taping these live. Uh, After the fact, they'll be going up on YouTube, wearing number 10 on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe there. And whether or not we can get this up on Spotify or as a podcast remains to be seen. I'll be working on that, but I'll keep you posted with everything. Twitter and Instagram at wearing number 10. Colin, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on.
Any excuse to talk about Liverpool and their famous victories. Thanks for having me on, Sean.
Yes, indeed. I've been Sean Breslin. Thank you so much for watching, listening, engaging however you can, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.